to the front page section of the SACB Sunday edition, and we're going to talk about GMOs. So we're going to read about GMOs. Okay, so what is a GMO? The term stands for genetically modified organism, and it has traditionally referred to plants and animals created by altering genes with laboratory techniques in ways that conventional forms of breeding can't often be inserted genetic material from one species into another. A gene from a soil bacteria, for instance, makes soybean immune to a widely used weed killer. A type of papaya has been modified to resistant to a crippling virus, and corn has rendered resistant to insects that attack it. Only a handful of such crops are grown around the world, but some of them, like corn, soybeans, and sugar beets, are used in the majority of processed foods that line the aisles of grocery stores, including chips, soda, salad dressings, soups, some breakfast cereals, and baked goods. So a lot of food items stand to bear these labels. And so here's another question they ask, and it goes, why are these guidelines being proposed now? And as you see here, it says, the answer is basically this. It's major food manufacturers have fought long and expensive battles against GMO labels, worry them to deter customers and give an advantage to organic food makers who lobby to advance labeling legislation and ballot measures in several states. Under the USDA guidelines, organic foods may not contain genetically engineered ingredients. In recent years, the legislators and consumer groups have stepped up efforts to pass labeling laws with bills and ballot initiatives appearing in California, Connecticut, Maine, Oregon, and Washington. After Vermont became the first state to pass a labeling law in 2014, food makers faced the expense of logical hurdles of retooling their packaging for one market, with others potentially on the horizon. Some manufacturers announced they would voluntarily place labels on their genetically engineered foods nationwide. Others agreed to push for legislation that would impose a nationwide standard with provisions like a QR or barcode that consumers could scan with mobile phones, and a term bioengineered that they preferred. Those efforts turned into a federal labeling bill signed into law by President Barack Obama in 2016. The DA then had to determine just what those labels would look like. Okay, difference in audience. And here, and then it goes on to say here, what will the proposed labels say? Okay, then the answer is, instead of commonly used but somewhat stigmatized term GMO and genetically engineered, the guidelines propose labels that say bioengineered or BE. Food makers would be given a choice of 3 disclosure methods, spelling out the information as in contains a bioengineered food ingredient, using a standard icon. The agency proposed several evoking sun and smiles, or affixing a QR code that directs consumers to a website with more information. And last, so they ask again, Do the labels cover all genetically engineered foods? Answer is no. New gene editing technologies let scientists tweak the DNA of plants and animals with great speed and precision, often by deleting a snippet of, genetic information, or by inserting a desirable trait from one breed into another at the same of the same species. Crops that contain such changes, which could theoretically be achieved conventional breeding or occurred through a natural mutation, are excluded from the proposed labels. The labels may also exempt highly refined sugars and oils, like those made from genetically modified sugar beets and corn, which typically contain no genetic material after being processed. Consumer groups oppose that move, which could significantly curtail the number of foods that carry the label, saying that it's not just what we ingest that matters, but how the food is produced. Foods whose primary ingredient is non-GMO meat, like beef, labeled even if they contain other genetically engineered ingredients. And so the last question is this a done deal? The answer is not yet. The public has until July 3rd to comment on the proposed guidelines. And that, let's take a break here, just breathe a little bit, stuff like that. And that is an article from the front page section of the Sunday edition of the Sacramento Bee.